Hello there. This video is kind of a bonus video where I wanted to explain to you how to do the same manipulation as the one we did in Nuke, but to do it in Photoshop, because maybe not all of us are using Nuke, and maybe we are not familiar or not really comfortable with Nukes, which is like a bit more heavy in terms of like texture manipulation, and the kind of things we want to do is definitely more powerful where we want to edit a 32-bit map, and we want to be able to, like, for example, to play with the values, to customize the values the way we want, and to really make sure that we can recover all of them. But not a lot of us are using Nuke, and maybe we want to be able to understand and to see how we can do the same exact process, same kind of texture preparation, but in Photoshop instead of being able to do it in Nuke. So this video is again bonus video that I'm adding to the list because I'm sure that people will be interested in this workflow. Disclaimer, I'm not the most familiar with Photoshop, and also Photoshop is kind of tricky to be able to help you to manipulate 32-bit maps. So we'll try to hack our way in and see how we can make our own Texturing XYZ style of displacement inside of Photoshop instead of using Nuke to do that. So first thing that we want to do, and it's similar to the Nuke process, similar to the Nuke video I showed before. So we will need to export 3 displacement. We will need to export the nose displacement, high frequency displacement, and all the details sculpted. So this hand sculpted displacement, and then the other one we want to export is this micro displacement. Just microscopic details for the nose and all this kind of really high frequency informations to break up the specularity when we'll play with the actual value of the displacement inside of our rendering engine. And finally, we want to export the anatomy. And what I call the anatomy displacement is mainly the low frequency displacement. We want to export it so we can remove it. We can remove the low frequency from the high frequency and only get access to these details without having the displacement from the nose, without having the anatomy being projected as part of our displacement map. So let's see how we want to export this map. Slightly different than the Nuke process. So instead of using a map with a mid value at 0, like we did with, or like we are doing with any displacement. And you could also do that for the Nuke workflow actually, but it's just that I wanted to show you how to export it with a mid value at 0, so you can know how you can like offset things inside of a Nuke, but it can also be applied for Nuke to export it with a mid value of 0.5. So in the plugin, I will go in the plugin here. Multi-map exporter. Tick the displacement because that's the one I want to export. 8K. Then in the displacement map, so remember what we said during the export, the model prep and the export file, so you can use that inside of Nuke. You may want to export your displacement not from the level 1 because it doesn't make sense to export from a super low definition model. You can export it from level 2 or from level 3, and it should be enough to recover the details you want to play with. So I will export from the level 3, and then here, slightly different than the new process, you can also add 1 dp suffix. As a reminder, the dp suffix is an additional, it's a virtual level of subdivision that's added at the end when you export a displacement. So if you want to add this extra level of subdivision, then it should be here to remove a little bit of the aliasing you will get from the map, from the exported displacement in the map. Do not go higher than 1, because here what it will do, because it's virtual, so if I'm at 15 million polygons with the highest level of subdivision, then it will subdivide it once more, mean that you will export something that will be about like 60 million polygon, and imagine like adding even 1 more dp suffix. I'm pretty sure that your machine will not be able to export that. It will take ages. It will export a map that's about like 60 million times 4, which is 240 million polygon, which in any case will never be able to be present as pixels information. It will be more than the number of actual pixels you can export. So it's not worth doing it. Stick to 1 if you want this additional level of subdivision with reduced aliasing. Stick to 0 if you just want to export your map like I'm always doing. I'm always sticking to 0. Then smooth UVs, 32-bit, EXR, can also export as TIFF, but I will export it as EXR because I'm always using EXR files. Then something different that we could play with, like for example, we could just like check these 3 channels and it will remove a lot of hassle from when we'll play with the map inside of Photoshop. But because I want you to understand how you can do the same by yourself with your own hands inside of Photoshop, I will not export it and I will show you in Photoshop how to do the process yourself. As usual, you want to scale at 1 and intensity at 0, and we will be able to play with the intensity, with multiply intensity directly in Photoshop to customize the amount of displacement we get out of this map. Okay, so I'm happy with the settings. Now export, create all maps, and I will create all maps for, okay, should be here in tutorial, Maya, source images, then nose disp, and in this one, you should go here in Photoshop. I already went ahead and exported this displacement. So this one is the disp. What I did was just to name it Zolo.something, .nothing, sorry. And when I'm naming Zolo.nothing, what it will do is after the first name I picked here, it will add the name of the subtool and then the name of the exported map. In my export options, I can show you my export options again, something that I did in the Nuke video, but just to make sure that you have that if you just focus on the Photoshop workflow. So, name of the export files will be the name of the subtool, then the name of the export map, then the UDIM tag, then the extension file. So for this reason, what I done before was to name my file disp. So it will be named disp.zdisp for ZBrush displacement, .1001 for the UDIM tag.exr. And then what it's doing also, and that's because ZBrush is really annoying with the way you need to export things and the way you need to name things. Not that it matters 100%, but just to show you how you can export things with proper naming convention. What it will do here, it will ask you for a name. So it's asking you for a name, so you need to pick a name. I name it Zolo, but it could be nose. If I pick the name nose, then the name of the file will be nose.disp.zdisp.1001.exr. And then I can get a proper naming convention. See how many hooks we need to cross if we want to name something right out of ZBrush. Anyway, that's the way to do it. So just remember that here you absolutely need to give it a name. I don't think that I can save anything if I don't have a name. So the name is the name of the map I want to export, or the name of the object from the map I want to export. Then .something. I rename the subtool with the name of the map that will be exported. Then I will have the additional name coming from the export option in Multimap Exporter. Finally, UDIM and extension. So many hooks. That's why I went ahead and I already renamed the files one by one, exported the file one by one before recording this tutorial. So we'll have the displacement, reminder, 3 displacement. Displacement for the nose, and high frequency and all the details and the unsculpted details. This one. Displacement for the microscopic displacement. Displacement for the low frequency displacement. As a reminder, you don't need to export all the level of subdivision. You can export from level 3. Low frequency, we have already all the information we need at level 8. We don't need to get additional level of subdivisions to get the low frequency. So I can export it from this level. Then let's go in our, have a look at our exported files and open Photoshop. So I was already trying to mess with the file, trying to make my TexturingXYZ, my own TexturingXYZ style displacement inside of Photoshop to see how we could manipulate the 32-bit maps inside of Photoshop. So let me bring a TexturingXYZ file that's already been combine. Like for example, we want to bring the female 30 and we want to have a look at the file and see what we want to do and why we want to shuffle the channels. We want to have like this kind of colorful displacement with red, green, and blue, different information between red, green, and blue. Something that is important at this point is to go in, I think we want to go in Windows and want to make sure that we can access to the channels. And here, that's where my channels are. We have red information. Again, the red is the displacement, then the green is the bump, and finally the blue is a microscopic displacement. And you can see that we have like different information into the 3 different channels. And then we have them combined as one file, because what we want to do is just want to import that into Mari, and in Mari we want to do one projection, and we want to pan through this file, and we will import that, project that through the camera, pan through our image, so it can be projected as one with just one stroke directly on our model. Something that we can see is already different between these 2 files, and that's why, again, I think it's easier to manipulate things in Nuke than in Photoshop. Look at the gray value. So the gray value is different, or looks different, is not different, it's the same, but it looks different between these 2 files. This is a displacement imported from Photoshop, the one we just exported together, and the mid value seems to be different. But this is only because here what I'm doing in Photoshop is that I'm displaying a 32-bit map that's exported from ZBrush. And here I'm displaying a 16-bit map that's exported from Nuke that I combine myself in another packages. And it looks to have a different value, but I can confirm that they are similar. Like for example, we can use picking our color sampler tool. I will use this color sampler tool, and I will just pick the value here. Then maybe I can pick a value somewhere else. Okay, then we have this panel with information that is appearing, and in this one, what I want to do is I want to put that into 32 bits, so we just have value between 0 and 1, and it's much easier for us to see the information we have here. And see, we have a value of 0.5 with the first picker, the first color sampler, and we have a value of 0.53, okay, 536 in the red channel, 535 in the green channel, 535 in the blue, so around 0.5, which makes sense. Then if I'm going back on this file, and I will also pick a color, or I will also pick an area around something where I have no information, just to make sure that also I'm having correct mid value. Put that in 32 bits, and the value are equal. They are around 0.5. They are exactly 0.5, but they look much more brighter than the one we have on this file, and it's only because of the way Photoshop is displaying the different files to you. It's not because the value are actually different, it's just that 32 bits are visually offset with gamma correction inside of the viewport. Just something to keep in mind. If you really want to see the value you are playing with, you have access to, and you have on your file, use this color sampler. You pick an area with this color sampler, then you select the info palette here, and in the info palette you put this in 32-bit, so you can make sure that your value are between 0 and 1, and you can really manipulate these different values. Okay, enough talking for the color sampler info. What we want to do now is to go into the heart of how we can prepare our file for projection. So what I will do is, instead of using this one, what we'll do is we'll start from a fresh file. So not this one, not female 30, because it's Texturing XYZ, already combined, it's working. We want to create our own displacement. So we will, at the base, as our starting base, we'll just pick this one. And okay, what I think I need to do, because it's already open, I need to close it. Yeah, I think I need to close it before being able to open it again. in Photoshop. I will need to rename it, but I'm too lazy to do that. Let's just close and do things again so we can see the workflow. So zolo.disp.cdisp, which will be our base, is asking us how we want to import our XR files. If you want to use the alpha channel as transparency or as alpha, I think this one is empty by default because we just exported one channel from ZBrush, so we just use as alpha channel. So it shouldn't matter, but alpha channel just to be safe. Now we have this file, and make sure that you are showing the different channels, because as I told you before, this one was exported from ZBrush, and in the exported options in ZBrush, if we just remind ourselves what we did, we uncheck these 3 channels. So that means that we are getting information only in the head channel. Okay, we can see a bit of the infos we have. We can see a bit of our displacement. It's definitely way too dim. It's losing a lot of contrast. So 32-bit, meaning that we cannot gain access to all the different adjustment layer, but the level should be enough for what we want to do. For the level information, again, I will just play with the red channel. I can maybe hide the green and blue and just display the red channel, pick my level. With the level, what we want to do is we want to balance. We want to lift and gain, just like we did in Nuke, meaning that we want to balance the black value and the white value, the ultra dark value and the ultra bright value. And we want to make sure that if we are adding 50, for example, I'm adding 50 to the black value, then I'm removing 50 on the other side. So I will always try to balance the values here to make sure that I'm always keeping the mid value at 0.5. It's what is important, is making sure that you are keeping this mid value to where it is at the moment. Still not contrasted enough. The reason why I'm using a level instead of, like, for example, picking the background, then I double click on the background and I will rename that my base disp layer. Duplicate it to have a save. This one is backup layer. Okay, this one will be my base display layer, and let's say that I'm not using this one and I'm just playing with this layer instead. What you can do is you can Control L and then play with that directly, but the problem by doing that is it's very destructive, and that's also one of the problems doing the manipulation in Photoshop, is that you are destroying your ability of going backward or of editing things. That's why, again, one of the main benefits of doing things in Nuke is that you are not destroying anything. Anyway, you could do it like this, but don't do it because you cannot go back. So I will just cancel that, and instead of using my Control L, I will do it directly with a level. Again, hiding the green and blue channel, and I will show you in a second how you can make sure that you do not need to do that every time. Play with this level. Okay, so I think that 50 is not enough, so maybe even 100, and then I will remove 100 from the other value. The default value is 255. So 255 minus 100, I should land on 155, and then I'm starting to get much more range on my file. Okay, so let's say that I'm happy with that. I can rename it base disp underscore contrast underscore level, because it's a level. Okay. And now the next manipulation we need to do is we need to remove the anatomy or the low frequency displacement from our current displacement, because we just want to be able to project. We don't want to be able to project the anatomy. What we want to project is just these details. So I will open that. Can I just drag and drop it? Cool, looks like I can drag and drop it. Yes, make sure that it's like really well aligned. So I will just drag and drop it here. By default, it's already way too dim, so I can just like pick this layer. Okay, have a look at the head. And my base disp contrast layer, okay, this one will be low frequency contrast layer. Let me expand a bit. Okay. And we want to have access to this guy, and the reason why we want to have access to it is that we can put that now in subtract mode, and now this displacement will be subtract from the previous displacement. So see what's doing is I'm removing this low frequency displacement from the high frequency displacement. So the problem by doing that is that we are removing a value, we are subtracting a value, a mid value of 0.5 by another mid value of 0.5. So 0.5 minus 0.5 means that we are landing on the displacement that will have a mid value of 0. So once we have that, let me just put that in a group. And I will call that low freq removal GRP. Okay. So once I have this in a group, what I can do is I can use an exposure. In the exposure node, I have this offset, and the offset is adding a mid value of 0.5. So let's rename this offset 0.5. Okay. And this is before and after. So a little bit hard to see, but with this new one, and I can just also play with the opacity. So this is with the new one, and I will just play with the opacity on and off to show you. No, sorry, the opacity of the group, not the opacity of the offset layer. Okay, so with this one, this is before and this is after. And something that we can see is that we have some bright values that are appearing here. And there's bright value in this area, in this global area. The bright value that we have here, the fact that it's looking way brighter than the other area, is coming from the low frequency displacement. It's coming from the anatomy of the nose that I sculpted in ZBrush, and is the one that I want to remove. So once I have this area that is way too bright, so what I want to do is I want to remove the value coming from the low frequency displacement. And that's why I want to use this group here to make sure that I can remove the bright value and end up with values that are becoming too way less bright than the one I had before. So this is with the subtraction, and this is without the subtraction. So with the subtraction, I just have access to my high frequency displacement, and without the subtraction, I have access to the low frequency displacement, to the anatomy of the nose, and the high frequency displacement at the same time. And this is not what I want. I just want to have access to the low frequency displacement. If you think that you are removing a bit too much of the low frequency displacement, because everything is non-destructive, the way we are building things, you can just like reduce the opacity and have an opacity of like something like 50%, and then you will have a mix between the two. So you will still get a little bit of displacement coming from the sculpt, but you will not get all the displacement coming from the primary shape of your sculpt. Okay, so this one is basically the red channel of our previous displacement, is the red channel of the Texturing XYZ file that we want to prepare. Now let's see how we can prepare the green and the blue channel. Okay, so low frequency, what I will do is I will just click on Ctrl Shift Alt and E. And Ctrl Shift Alt and E, what it will do is it will combine all of the layers that are underneath the one that is selected, or all of the visible layers, I think, and it will create a new one with this combination. On this one, I will rename it my bump underscore layer. Then what I can do is I can pick the channel red, do a Ctrl A to select everything inside of this channel, Ctrl C, go in the channel green and do a Ctrl V. Then go in the channel blue and do a Ctrl V again. And now if I'm just having a look at my RGB channels, now in the red, green, and blue, have access to the same information, which is a bit just easier for us to show inside of the viewport. It's not what we want at the end of the day, at the final export, it's just something that we are doing in order to simplify the process. So bump underscore layer, and what I want to do on this one is I want to isolate just the high frequency displacement, the even higher frequency displacement. So I can do that by going into filter, other, and do a high pass. Now with this high pass, what you can see is that you can really play with this value in order to isolate just the frequency of details you want, and that's exactly the workflow we want to do. We really want to isolate only the frequency we want to play with. Like for example, I can isolate the use a radius of 35, for example, to isolate only this part of the displacement. So the previous one I had before, if I had just look at the red channel again, this is a displacement and this is bump. And you see we have access to only the highest frequency of the previous result. Okay, so we have the bump that has been isolated. Maybe it's not contrasted enough. Easy to solve. If you want to contrast it, what you do is you just pick your previous contrast adjustment layers. Like for example, I can pick this one, duplicate it on top. Okay, and then on this one, I can either play with the values here, or I can just use it as a visibility slider. This one will be my bump contrast layer. Level, sorry, because it's a level adjustment layer that I'm using. I will hook it to the bump layer, and I can just play with the opacity to reduce its contrast opacity. Okay, so we have that. Another way you can do it, if you want to make things even less destructive, like for example, I will just delete these two layers, do my process again, Ctrl Alt Shift E to duplicate everything that's visible and combine them into just one layer, then Ctrl A into my red channel, Ctrl C, Ctrl V into the green channel, Ctrl V into the blue channel, and now I can convert that, my bump layer, I can do a right click and convert to a smart object. The reason why I may want to convert it as a smart object is because once it's converted, when you have a layer that is converted in Photoshop as a smart object, any filter that you will apply will become live, and they will still be editable. So you are not destructing anymore what you are doing in Photoshop, because things are kept editable. So I can, for example, just replace what I have inside of the bump layer with something else, and then the high pass will still be applied on the replaced content. And I can also play with a higher high pass intensity or reduce it to a lower high pass intensity. So now that this is converted it's converted to a smart object, you can see that I have a new icon here. And if I go in filter, other, high pass, apply the high pass value, look at what is happening on the bump layer here. Now I have this smart filter that is applied, and I can play with the filter on and off. And I can also double click on my high pass and make it more or less visible depending on what I want to achieve. Then I can pick my adjustment layer, hook it to my bump layer, rename that bump contrast level, and reduce the opacity to something like this. Yes. Okay, so we have the bump, we have the displacement, we have this layers that have been prepared. I will just put that into the bump, GRP, and this one will be my disp GRP. And now the final what we want to create is the microscopic displacement. Same workflow as before. I will just like pick my microscopic displacement, drag and drop it inside of Photoshop. Okay, so this is my microscopic displacement. Super hard to see because again, it's microscopic information and it's like really tiny details. Then go into my disc GRP, use the same contrast as the one I had for the displacement. Cool. Then once I have this, I will rename that into micro contrast level. Then I will pick also the low frequency removal, this one, and just duplicate it on top of the microscopic displacement to make sure that I'm removing the low frequency from the microscopic displacement. So let's look at what we have into the red channel. Okay, it's super hard to see, so maybe we need to contrast things even more. So in order to do that, again, I can just like take this adjustment layer, duplicate it again on top of it. And now we should start to see some informations. Yeah, we start to see some microscopic displacements being visible on our map. Probably want to remove this one even further though, so I can only access to these microscopic informations. Okay, so once we have the microscopic information that have been isolated, level 2, level 1. Okay, so we have the microscopic information that are isolated into this one. Then if I just put that in a group, this one will be my micro underscore GRP. This is microscopic layer, this is a bump layer, and this is the disp layer. So what I can do from now is I will pick the red channel from each of them and put them into the appropriate green, blue, and red channel for the Texturing XYZ style. Okay, so let me just open again my Texturing XYZ file. I want to play with the creature XYZ, humans, all-in-one, female face. Just open this one again. So, reminder, red, green, and blue, 3 different channels with different informations. So that's exactly what we need to do in order to make them compatible with each other. So what we will do is we can create a new layer. Okay. Then this layer by default will be empty, but what I can see through this layer, I can see what's happening into the microscopic GRP because this one is visible and on top of all the other ones. I will pick the red channel, do Control A to make sure that we are selecting all of what's happening into the red channel. Control C, go on our empty layer, go into the blue channel of the empty layer and Control V. I think that nothing happens, probably because, okay, nothing happened, makes sense. Control D to unselect things. Let's try it again, Control A. Okay, it's because everything is empty inside of this layer and the selection is expecting me to have something in the layer. So what I will do instead of doing that, I will just like Control Shift Alt E to duplicate all of the visible layers, make them available as just one layer basically. Okay, then I will pick the red channel, Control A, Control C, and copy it into the blue channel. Okay, Control D, let's hide this guy. Then I will, and this one is basically our combine layer. Okay, then I will choose the bump and hide the microscopic displacement and the combine, Control Shift Alt E to combine all of the visible layer as one new layer. Okay, then I will pick the red channel from this new layer, Control A and Control C, go on my combine. On the combine, because we are playing with the bump, I will copy it into the green channel. And finally, let's do it again, but this time with only the disp visible, Control Shift Alt E. Pick only the red channel, Control A, Control C, go on my combine layer, go on the red channel of my combine layer and do Control V. And now we have our Texturing XYZ displacement file. This guy. And I can see that I have different information between the red, green, and blue channel. And now that I have my Texturing XYZ file that is ready, I can export it as EXR. So I can import it into Nuke and into Mari and start painting through it. One last thing we could do with this guy is see this one is reversed, so I can just like maybe go in image. Can we do that with 32-bit map? I'm not sure. Image rotation, do 180-degree rotation, so it's rotating all of the UVs, all of the file that has been exported, and now it's in the correct sense, correct orientation. And what I can do as well is I can also use my crop to remove the area that I'm not planning to paint from the displacement. Click on Enter. And I have my Texturing XYZ file that has been optimized. Let's have a look at the different values before we export things. So I can use, again, my color sampler, clicking on I, then pick an area, make sure that this one is in 32-bit. This one should be also in 32-bit. And you can see that the mid value is 0.5. Mid value of the red channel is 0.5, mid value of the green channel is 0.5, mid value of the blue channel is 0.5 as well. And if I'm like putting this one here, then I will get different mid values, and it makes sense because again the red channel has more bump, more displaced information. The green channel has more high frequency information, and finally the blue channel has more low frequency, even higher frequency information. Something I don't really like at the moment is how the blue channel is looking, because I'm really expecting to get only the high frequency displacement, not the lower frequency displacements. Here are way too much informations, I think. So I can adjust that. Like for example, what I can do is I can take I would just kill this layer, reverse the visibility of the different layers, take my microscopic displacements, yes, Control Shift Alt E to create a new version of it because I'm not satisfied with the previous version I had. It's merging everything that is visible on one new layer like we did before. Then on this one I can go in Filter, do High Pass. And with this high pass, we'll say that we just want to isolate the tiny details. Let's zoom in. Click on OK. Okay, so this is the result I have. Do I want to contrast it? Yeah, probably want to add a bit more contrast. Or what I could do also, I can just like duplicate it, but that's in. We have access to the overlay. Now we don't have access to the overlay mode in 32-bit. So let's use a level instead of previous one. 50 minus 50 plus 50 minus 50. Isolate the red channel. Perfect. Yes, it's better. Okay, so maybe I want to raise this contrast intensity to like plus 80 minus 80, so should be 175, I think. Yes, and it's much better than what I had before. Then I can just merge these two layers together. Isolate only the red channel, Control A, Control C, go into my combine layer and replace the blue channel with the new one. And I should have something that's, yeah, work much better in terms of values I want to play with, and in terms of, if I'm comparing with what I have with Texturing XYZ, I can see the values are much closer. So I'm happy with this one. What I will do now is just Control Shift S, then export this into this folder. It can be exported as EXR, nose.disp or nose.xyz 001 because it's the first version. Now, Photoshop is asking me which compression I want to play with. I will use no compression because I'm not certain that the compression of XR from Photoshop is destructive. You can try with RLE or use none. Let's use none. Should be also faster to save. And let's have a look into our export folder. Okay, so this is my export folder. So I have this new displacement. Also the compression is really bad, 360 megabyte. Let's try to export a second one with a compression now. Can uncheck also the alpha channel. I don't think I need to export the alpha channel, but it's empty by default, so shouldn't have any values anyway. So let's try with second compression. And it's much better, it's much more reduced in terms of size. So the first one is 360 megabyte, and the second one is 117 megabyte. If we just open them again in Photoshop, then we can see that now we have access to our Texturing XYZ file. So as a conclusion, I know it's a really heavy workflow and it's not something that is super easy to do. It asks you a lot of different manipulation. It asks you to be familiar also with the values you are playing with. It asks you to be familiar with the color space you are playing with, to know how to manipulate 32-bit values inside of Photoshop or inside of Nuke. But at the end of the day, it's a really powerful workflow. So you can use that to create all kind of displacement you want. I did it for the nose of my dog, but I could also export one for, I don't know, if I had some particular scales I want to do. Let's say I'm working on a dinosaur, and if I'm working on the dinosaur, I want to sculpt one really particular style of scale. I can do it on a sphere. I can sculpt these details on a sphere and then export this as its own displacement and use it to project it, or to use it as a tileable directly inside of Mari. So really powerful workflow, asks you to manipulate the value in a lot of different ways and to be familiar with the different values. But at the end of the day, it's again a really powerful workflow. So this is it for this video. So in the next one, what we'll see is how to import this Texturing XYZ, this new Texturing XYZ files inside of Mari, project them on the model and recover, play with the different channels, recover the different frequency of details, contrast the different frequency of details, and use that directly on as a projection tool. This is it for this video, guys. See you in the Mari projection.